This week, I'm excited to bring on one of my best mates to the show, current international age group coach, Alana Gunn. Gunnie and I have been close friends for over 20 years and have shared a lot of time in coaching environments together, but I'm proud to see her forging her own career on the international stage these past few years. Having spent the last 10 years coaching in not only some of the best New Zealand female environments, but also collecting trophies along her journey, Gunnie now leads the talent development and ID parts of New Zealand football whilst bossing the New Zealand under 16 and 17 national teams. Okay, let's go. Alana Gunn. No, that seems too formal. Gunnie, great to have you on the show finally. How are you?
Well, Gareth, thanks for having me.
Hey, we go back longer than probably any other guests I've had on the show to date. 20 odd years as good mates. We've seen a lot of things. We've experienced a lot of things together. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with a genuine mate, as much as a connection I've forged over the years. So yeah, really pleased to see you. You're up in Wellington by the looks. What's today going to bring for you?
Sunny Wellington, actually, which is a rarity. Heading into the Phoenix Academy today. So hoping to get on the grass there and start to get to know the new cycle of players that have been brought into that space. So
this
put
is
my boots back on first time.
This will be linked to your role as the national under 17 women's head coach.
Yeah, and pathway manager. So New Zealand football working quite closely with the Phoenix and soon to be Auckland FC around our pathway, and it's definitely one big arm of it.
Yeah, brilliant. You mentioned putting the boots on. Let's just start there. Maybe you had a reasonable playing career. Played up to national league level in New Zealand. I remember coming watching a game and you scored a hat trick.
On debut.
2 or 3 ACLs later, the playing boots got hung up and the coaching whistle got found. Just talk to me about that kind of transition from playing into coaching, and why was that something you wanted to do, as opposed to other parts of your life at that stage? You could have gone down 2 or 3 different roads as a career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think after like you said, 3 surgeries and a kind of suggestion that running wasn't going to be a great outcome long term, the decision to stop playing was a pretty easy one. However, football was life. Football was my social network. Football was very much my sense of belonging. So being able to stay in the game was really important. And I think that coaching didn't come straight away, but the role of, I guess, mascot and supporter and a good time leader was probably the first thing that came about. And then not too long after, realizing that the resource in the female game and the lack of coaching and support wasn't there, and that kind of started to kind of not weigh down but become more noticeable. And so that's when I kind of started to give coaching a crack. And obviously when we as in me and you, as you kind of went down your journey and kind of opened the door and offered that mentorship role, it was a pretty easy one to jump and take, and that obviously included the shift of clubs, and that's kind of when I deem taking, I guess, my first steps into coaching a little bit more serious.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. I remember quite clearly having a coffee, I think at your work actually, with my mentor, Koresh Monsef, and we were talking about a raft of things, but one of the things I must have raised a question to him, like, kind of what, where am I going to go next, and all this sort of, just blue sky thinking kind of ideas. And one of the points he made to me was, who's going to take over? Like, where's your succession plan? Have you thought about that? And I was like, oh, no, not really. Like, and he goes, well, a big part of, leaving legacy and all that sort of stuff is leaving things in a good place when you move on, and not just, forget about it and hope that, it's not your problem anymore. So I thought quite long and hard about it. And in terms of successions or successor, I thought, well, I really want to, ensure I leave this place. And at this point, it was Coastal Sprit, right? It's sort of spent 2 or 3 years in a role and try and build it up, and I didn't want it to sort of just fall over. So being close mates with you and you starting down your coaching journey, I thought, well, it would be pretty awesome to not only leave in a good place, but spend some time working with somebody I have a lot of respect for as well. So yeah, being able to lure you across the dark side in Christchurch football was it's probably a challenging one for you. I had done it previously when I was still playing. But yeah, it was great to start working with the first time I really had an assistant coach. It was always sort of me prior to that. So yeah, that succession was an important one for me to bring across. So yeah, maybe just cast your mind back to that kind of that first season or those first few months. Like, what were some of the challenges or fears that you faced sort of coming into the opposition club?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the social aspect of it was probably the initial, the hardest part. You kind of get thrown in a category of, not being loyal or those sorts of things as well. And then in terms of getting on the grass, I think as all female, or maybe not all, but most female coaches, as they're starting their career, there's that little devil on your shoulder. Are you good enough? Do you know what you're talking about? Those sorts of things. So that definitely come in to play. I think as you spend more time on the grass, you get more and more comfortable. And like I mentioned earlier before, I have a real strong connection to football and belonging in that space. So it didn't take too long to I guess, to feel comfortable and I guess know that this was an opportunity to learn and develop as a person and a coach. So, yeah.
What sort of things were you, actively trying to learn and develop in what areas? How did you view me, I guess, as the head coach at the time, as a vehicle for your own development?
Yeah, good question. It's a funny one because I think sometimes when you don't know you're on this journey, you kind of don't know what to look for. But I think in hindsight or reflection, looking back, you're definitely taking in leadership style, a lot about how you lead and I guess portray your philosophy and how you want your team to play, but also how you want your team to be and act and where your values, your personal values kind of fit into that. And I think that's something that you've been really strong at in terms of knowing self and knowing how to apply that to a team. So that I think over time, it rubs off on you and which has been really cool. And then I think while I was alongside you as the assistant coach, I'm also taking the reserve team. So a lot of time on the grass, which I just think is invaluable and is one of my biggest things that I say to, young female coaches now is like, just don't rush, like give yourself a lot of time on the grass because it's where you can fail and try again and fail and try again. And the reality is now it's not a high pressure environment. So if it is a safe space, then it's a great place to learn. Yeah, for sure.
You make a good point. You're also a head coach whilst being an assistant. So if we fast forward another couple of years, I was fortunate enough to move into the National League space with Mainland Pride. And it was an obvious one for me to bring you in as my assistant there, as the seasons didn't overlap as much. So you were still able to have the continuity, and now you're the head coach at club level. So your thoughts on maintaining both those two roles simultaneously? Like, were you able to draw upon one and that helps the other? Like, does being a head coach help you become an assistant, or do you think being an assistant helps you become an assistant?
Yeah, I imagine they both complement each other in ways. I think I guess one of the challenges is time. So working a full-time job and then facilitating a role within two teams is, there was a lot of time dedicated into that area. I think my role as an assistant coach and going from that club land into the Mainland Pride assistant coach role, shifts the purpose a little bit more professionalism, and there's a little bit more other support staff around you. So you're learning more and more things. And I remember we had the conversation one year where you challenged me. It was like, where are you going? What do you want to be doing? Do you want to be an assistant coach? Like, do you want to take your assistant coach game really far? Or is this something that you're trying to mold to become a really good head coach? And, it was a great question, and it threw a lot of things. And I think even through, like, what is your goal? Do you want to be Canterbury's best ever coach? Do you want to, get into the New Zealand football pathway and that sort of thing? And I think it was the first time I'd ever kind of been thrown a question like that to really, I guess, give me a drive or a purpose. And I thought about it and I was like, man, imagine being a kind of a world-class assistant coach. That would be a really cool gig, because being an assistant coach is very different to a head coach. And I think from where I was at the time, I could see it being more enjoyable, because you can kind of, it's not as stressful, you're not leading the group, and you can kind of connect with the players a little bit more. Hindsight now, I'm a little bit older. It was probably because I was the player's age or closer to the player's age. So in terms of a social connect, there was a little bit more freedom there. And it wasn't too long after that I realised I did actually want to be a head coach. As much as I enjoy being an assistant coach and being a part of a team, I didn't want to lie to myself, because I thought it was easier to be a good assistant coach and a lot harder to be a head coach. Yeah.
You mentioned the social connect, and I think back to that time, and maybe my personality, maybe my definition or view around being a head coach is being removed from your playing group, more so than probably not. I looked at you and go, well, you were very much part of that cohort, right? You were, the assistant, the mate, the go out and socialise away from football a lot. Not that I was concerned or worried for you, but I thought, well, that's going to be a tricky one to sort of walk back a little bit if you become their head coach. There could be some liberties that the players start to take. So maybe just talk around that moment for you and those sort of experiences, and is that something you agreed with, disagree with, and then how did you navigate those waters when you were actually their head coach as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, through its challenges, and I think it was probably a little bit of how I was in my playing career. There wasn't a fine line between the coach and the staff, and beers after training or a game was a common thing, and so naturally that kind of flooded into my coaching and my I guess how I managed a team. But there definitely was a point where I was had to take a step back, and you did notice that you're going to come up with a lot more challenges by continuing down this route than you are by not removing yourself in elements of it. I think as you get older, it gets a lot easier because your I guess self-awareness and your purpose is a little bit more clearer. So, back then it was my social life, it was everything. So now I have life outside of my coaching and things like that. So it's a lot easier to, I guess, draw the line in the sand with that stuff. I think that the issues that you come up with, obviously, when you're head coach, selection, favoritism, all of those sorts of things. I think if you lead with true, honest values, then you can kind of front foot those conversations pretty easily. And I still genuinely think, would I do it differently? I don't know. I had a real good time. But I think the world's changed now, and that professionalism is in a lot earlier. So yeah, now I would probably do it a little bit different.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because we're not talking about professional football at this moment in time, right? It's amateur football, it's representative football, it's a high level of football. And we were aspirational, right? We set some goals where we wanted to become national champions, which hadn't happened prior. And we set about that. And for me, one of the pillars of my coaching is around joy based. So talk about the culture of our environment we worked hard, but we also played hard a little bit. So I think, there's a balance. And as a head coach, you've got selection decisions, but I think the point you make about being honest and I think fair around what we do and transparent, you can still have a good time as a group. You can still socialize. But it depends on what your values are as a head coach and what the kind of cultural structure of your environment is. One of the things that I remember when I was the head coach and you're the assistant was to ensure, maybe it was after the conversation that you brought up before, was to try and ensure that I'm actively creating space for you and the other staff members to lead within the environment. It wasn't just me driving things. It was, and this is something that I believe wholeheartedly in. And when I was the under-20s head coach, we were at the World Cup, we had my assistant coach, we had a support coach, we had a goalkeeping coach, and me, and we all sort of selected the team for the third pool game. And, I felt it's important that everybody had their input and their say. And when it came to the goalkeeper selection, the 3 other staff members all picked a certain goalkeeper. and me as the head coach picked our backup goalkeeper. And we ended up going with the one that the other three selected because I felt was, a big part of our process was everybody's feeding into where we're heading. So coming back to when you and I were working, it was important for me that I allowed space for you to, deliver, but also lead. Now that you're a head coach, has that kind of translated into how you approach things? Is it the opposite? How do you think, what advice have you got, I guess is the question I'm asking, to head coaches who have a staff that they need to get the best out of in order to help achieve whatever objectives? How do you now manage your staff in terms of that kind of space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this has been one of my hardest journeys in the coaching space. You go from a really under-resourced journey where you were wearing many hats, and then you slowly get drip-fed staff as you kind of go up the ranks and into the teams. And now, heading to a World Cup and working with 7 or 8 staff members that you were genuinely leading has been a real learning curve, and ensuring that they feel valued, that they're a part of a team, that they're doing meaningful work on the grass, and that they have the freedom to be themselves is a challenge. I think I get the connection piece done pretty well, but in terms of giving them the license to kind of run with their role has been the struggle. And I think that actually doesn't come down to a leadership style, but more the lack of development in our pathway, in our playing style, and everything that comes along with that. So while that evolves, I think those guys will evolve with it. But it is a journey, and I think the important part first is the connection piece. And hopefully, they've all re-signed, so the staff are coming with me again this year. So we had a really good time last year, but it's been hard. It's hard to I guess bring those guys on your journey with you. Does that answer your question?
We'll get to the international space soon, because there's a lot we can dig in there. Just want to close the loop on this kind of part of our storyline. So you mentioned the journey. So for you, you've been on your coaching journey, and I'd say maybe the first third, maybe the first half, we were quite connected in that. How have you gone about forging your own way now? Like, was the time we spent together about right? Did you feel that, were you active? Because I haven't asked you this, I don't know. Like, were you actively trying to cut ties and forge your own path? Like, I guess if coaches listening in that might be, an assistant or working closely with somebody for a number of years, I'm probably in the same boat. I've been the assistant coach now at Melbourne Victory for 6 years, working with Jeff Hopkins. 6 years is a long time. I've actually chosen to say, like, this is our last season. I'm cutting ties from this relationship. Nothing against Jeff, but I feel like I've developed enough as I can under him. We're starting to, we've got as much out of each other as we possibly can. We've been successful, but at some point that time has got to come. How did you feel that for you? When did you feel that? And then I guess those early stages of going out by yourself, so to speak. What were some of the things that you really actively tried to pursue?
I think the beauty of our mentor-mentee relationship was, you see a lot of coaches under coaches, and they start to speak like them. They develop their philosophy very similar to them. I think what you did very well was there was always that direction of freedom to be self and to come up with my own ideas and to challenge you in a way that's obviously respectful and within the kind of guidelines of an assistant coach, but to guide that kind of that challenge in that space. So when you moved on, and I kind of, from Clubland to Pride, and then I took over that role, and then when you moved on from Mainland Pride, and I stepped into that role, it was fluid. It was really fluid. And I think there was enough tools in the bank to be able to not have to copy and paste what I'd learnt from my head coach in front of me. So it wasn't, although give me all the Excel templates in the world, I wasn't copy and pasting what you had done because we had been successful. I think as you're developing, you do have to be across that I one day am going to be a head coach. How would I have done this? How would have I done that? And so continuously challenging that reflection piece, I think, is really important while you're in that assistant coach role. And I guess the time frame that we did it in, I think if you look at the early success I had in my Mainland Pride career, the timeline was right. I think the timeline was really good. I think that first year in 2013, it was really challenging, but we were still very successful. And then that lasted a couple more years following that. So I think the timelines were really good. In hindsight, could have it been maybe a bit quicker? Yeah, absolutely. Could have it been longer? Yeah, but you're right. Like there's a point where you actually have to move on. I actually reflect that in my Mainland Pride head coach role. I think I was there for too long. I think I probably could have left a couple of years earlier because I definitely had plateaued. Yeah.
So just for context, so I don't remember the years, to be honest, but I had 3 years as the Mainland Pride head coach. You were with me for all 3 of those. We won in year 2 and year 3 for the first time from a national competition perspective. Then I moved on. There was a year that, or maybe even 2 years, that you remained the assistant, and then you took over the head coach beyond that for a number of years. So within like an 8-year window of time as an organisation, I think there was 5 or 6 national championships. So thinking back to the start of you going now as the Pride head coach, how much of that, I guess, legacy and building blocks from our first time together, how much of that remained versus it was completely different? I guess the question is sort of derived around growing a legacy or the stress of trying to maintain a legacy versus, that was the past. That was a different head coach. Yes, they were successful, but we can be successful in a different way. How much do you think was maintained and naturally evolved versus start again?
Yeah, because there was the time. So within that spectrum of time of that kind of 12-year period from me being an assistant coach to ending as a head coach, I also had that couple of years off where I had, Lulu. So that also gave a new refreshed perspective. So in terms of coming back into the Pride in 2018, where I took over the head coach role, there was still massive momentum from our early success. There was still a real we were still on a roll. We very much were, and we leveraged off that a lot to continue it. I think what we recognized really early is we had to keep it fresh and keep it exciting. We had to kind of continue to evolve the program in order to contain that success, but we definitely leveraged off the success of the past. Things like creating a reputation, English Park being a fortress, and, that 30-degree day heat, come on down, try beat us, like that sort of stuff definitely come about. People hated us. People wanted to beat us. Yeah, because of the past. Yeah.
So it didn't wear you down, or didn't feel like a burden as such. It was something that, well, I guess you could choose to view it however you chose, right? Just trying to think.
I don't think it's a burden because it's something I guess I'm proud of. Like I was proud to be a part of that turning point of Canterbury football. As a assistant coach and a leader in that space for those girls, like I loved that time. So it was definitely never, from my perspective, viewed as a burden. And, you see some of the success that is coming out of Canterbury United Pride and the Wellington Phoenix and overseas and in the Ferns. And I don't think you ever want to look at that as a burden.
Speak about Canterbury football. Let's go Christchurch. So it's just a city. It's might be New Zealand's second biggest or maybe third biggest city. It's small though. It's 350,000 people, right? So small part of the world and a global game, starting to conquer New Zealand, and then these players, some of the players that we've spoken about have played abroad. Kate Taylor's now in France. Kayla Moore, prior to that, played at Liverpool. You got Laura Merrins in the UK. Vic Essens at Rangers. Like the list can go on and on and on, right? And obviously filling the national team. How did you feel about growing or outgrowing working in a small town, like not that small, obviously, but small comparative to, say, Melbourne or even Auckland, right? How did you feel about that journey out of New Zealand into New Zealand and then hopefully into space beyond that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, you can exhaust resources further than we do as a player and a coach, living in Christchurch and kind of outgrowing the football there as a coach. Like I said kind of earlier, maybe 1 or 2 years in the Mainland Pride too long, and I was definitely ready for, I guess, a fresh perspective. What we did there was cool. If we go underneath the Pride and the Pride development program that we created kind of over that 5 years, was new, and it was good. It was a good quality product. And so I think if you have the right support networks, the right mentors, you can stay in a place long, I think. But you do have to be open to plateau, and you do have to be open and aware that, if you are driven to kind of progress, then there are moments where you do actually have to step back and be like, I think I have outgrown this place. And I probably didn't do that. I probably took a little bit too long to do that, I think. Yeah.
What other environments were you seeking out or gained access to that helped, whilst, you might have been plateauing from a progression perspective, but you were still moving forward in terms of your coaching development, understanding, building philosophy, developing relationship skills? What are the things were you able to tap into whilst still being in Christchurch that allowed you to keep moving forward?
Lots. And I've been really fortunate. I think being a female in a country where there's not a lot of qualified female coaches, you get opportunity. So 2016, I went to Papua New Guinea under 20s World Cup. Really late call-in. It was just to replace the female coach that could no longer go. So there was no real role there apart from to experience it. But what a cool experience. Papua New Guinea in itself is a pretty wild place, let alone to be going to your first ever World Cup, being able to sit on the bench and see it firsthand. That New Zealand under 20 team, we played Ghana, USA, and France, and some of the players that we're playing against now are top 10. The big players. So that was a really cool experience. New Zealand secondary schools again, alongside you, and then leading that program myself in school football, and then all the kind of coaching opportunities you get along the way to and in the education sense. So women in leadership through New Zealand football, all the coaching licenses. I've been lucky enough to attend a lot of things and get a lot of education that way, for sure.
You mentioned New Zealand secondary schools. That's another Gareth Gunny combo. But beyond that, you also were working at St Andrews College for a number of years. So you've racked up a hell of a lot of hours on the grass, dealing with programs, working with different staff, leading staff. I guess what is your take on the differences between sort of a week to week and a game on the weekend sort of level program versus either a campaign, i.e. the Pride or New Zealand secondary schools, in terms of smaller times together? How do you bring groups to, how do you bring together people on the same path? Obviously, all of this has helped prepare you for where you are now. But what is your kind of summation of the main differences between kind of club coaching and international coaching?
Yeah, it is. It's massive. And I think that's been a massive learning too when you're going into a campaign compared to having the opportunity to work on something across a whole season. So you have to be very specific in what you seem important, because you don't have a lot of time in a campaign sense or a tour sense, where in a season, you're seeing the players 3 to 4 times a week. You've got a game to assess yourself on every week. So it is very, very different. So preparation is massive. Process is massive, which 2 things that I've never been good at. So really upskilling in those areas for my new role. And your people skills, you have to be able to be adaptable. You have to be able to get on with a wide range of people, because you don't want to be going away with people you don't like, or you can't get on with, or you can't empathize with. Those 3 things, I think you have to be really flexible.
Yeah, they are very different. My advice to people listening is, if you have the opportunity to fulfill a function or a role in both, so something where it's day to day, week to week, versus a smaller, more concentrated period of time, I think you should take it. I certainly became heavily influenced through my 5 years at New Zealand football, working with and under some amazing leaders there, but I had to seek out, now I've been with Melbourne Victory for 6 seasons, that day-to-day contact. I was conscious that my approach as a head coach was, and some of those are strengths, right? My succinctness of instruction, words and pictures, trying to get a message across in a variety of different methods in a short period of time. Succinctness on the grass. All these things I think are strengths and required traits of tour-based New Zealand football international level environments. But I didn't have great strength in relationship building with players over a period of time, great empathy, because you just don't have the opportunity, let alone the time or the need, probably, from a camp to camp, cycle to cycle thing. So working with someone like Jeff, who that's his real strength. He's been in that space now for 15 or so years. But I think we have complemented each other really well over these years, where it's kind of, I describe it as yin and yang. He can talk for hours and arm around the shoulder. And I needed to learn and experience and see that stuff firsthand, which has made me a lot more rounded coach and leader. But I think without having the New Zealand football or the camp style base that would, just went from Pride to, say, the A-League women's, it's sort of the same. I would have missed out real development in that middle tier. And I think if I had stayed in that, I wouldn't, I certainly wouldn't be, as effective in the day-to-day stuff as well. So yeah, I guess my advice to everybody is, if you can seek out opportunities such as those, then go and do it. Let's move forward into international football. So you've been to a couple of World Cups as support coach, assistant coach, and you've just gone as the head coach of the New Zealand under-17s. Talk to me about kind of, now you're in this sort of hot seat. It's a hot seat in some respects because it's international football. It's, people are watching, but it's not in the same respect because it's a development part of the system, right? It's about the senior national team winning games. So as an under-17, there's an element of preparing players for that later part of their journey. But you still want to perform well and win games. How was it when you first walked in the door? What were some of the things that you, upon reflection, being in that job now for a year, are actively working on trying to get right or improve for the next time you get to go to the World Cup?
Yeah, it was a pretty wild ride the last 12 months. Started the role in January, which was, I guess, at the end of year one of a 2-year cycle for these girls going to the Under-17 World Cup. It was also the first year that we had a qualifiers and a World Cup in the same year, now that the Under-17 World Cups go annually. So the first half of the year was doing ID, up and down the country, trying to ID the girls, because the year before that, just through a number of things, hadn't been done to a level that I was comfortable with. And then we went to qualifiers with an under-16 team. So it wasn't just managing an under-17 team, but managing an under-16 team where, it's a little bit different to the World Cup because you are expected to win. There is a pressure there to win because you need to qualify for the World Cup. And then 10 days later, we were on the plane to the Dominican Republic. So it was a pretty wild ride. Massive learnings on, I guess, on what I knew very well was the landscape of the country, how we are populated in areas, how we have talent spread across little corners of New Zealand that we need to ensure that we continue to tap into and give opportunity to, which is hard when there isn't a good female competition that's equal across the country, or a lack of coach development in the female space. So a lot of work to do in that space, but also a real lack of preparation. So heading into a World Cup without having played a game was pretty daunting. And then also a brand new set of staffs that hadn't worked together essentially across a 90-minute period or anything like that. So we were going in pretty raw. And of course, it's your first World Cup. So it's the first time all of our staff and all of our players are experiencing this amazing opportunity to travel across the world and be involved in international football, which, for me, I'm always a fan first. So it was incredible to experience on the grass. I made a real conscious effort to stay in the now and just enjoy it. You talked about a hot seat. I never felt like I was in the hot seat. I think New Zealand football do a very good job at ensuring that this role is for my development as much as the players' development. And we had a good time. we had a good time. Yeah.
I think some of the value, the key for you at least, was you got to go and experience it before you were in that quote unquote hot seat. But the players sometimes don't know, and if without any pre-World Cup preparation, that's really challenging. I think back to when I was in charge of 17s, I had not been to a FIFA event prior, so for me it was new. We were fortunate; we got invited to China for pre-World Cup tour. It was China, Japan, Canada, and ourselves, and we'd obviously qualified through Oceania. We had all the footage and tactical model, blah blah blah, and we got to go to China. This was instead of going like just before the World Cup and having a lead-in game. And I'm so glad we did, because we got to China. It was 3 games in 5 days. We had to play the day after we got off the plane against China, and we were 5-0 down at halftime. And I remember walking in the change room and going, okay, this is what international football actually looks and feels like. Not, and all due respect to the island nations, not like IFC. So we got through that little experience, finished 5-0, so we did much better the second half. We lost to Canada, I think 2-1, and we lost to Japan 3-1. So we came back from that little mini pre-World Cup tour and go, okay, we've got 3 months now. Now we know where the level is. So for you, going to the World Cup and the players not necessarily experiencing that prior, how are you now able to kind of feed those learnings into this new cycle? Did you have some players that you took to the last World Cup that can go again, and you're going to lean heavily on them as leaders, and they can kind of drive some of that? What sort of methods have you got to help prepare the players as much as your staff, now that's their second time as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We took 7 players that were 08, so we potentially have 7 players being selected for this year's World Cup. So, which is massive. I think it'd be the first time ever that there's been more than 1 or 2 players that are actually going to a 17 World Cup that have already been to one. So that's a pretty cool opportunity to leverage on. I think some of the things that we took away was the resilience level of the players internally. So this is the first time they've never been selected for a starting 11. This is the first time that they've never come off the bench in a game. This is the first time that they're being punished for their mistakes and things like that. So thinking of those things and how we're going to adapt within our program, we have to create an environment where we are dropping and selecting these players before we go away, so they can experience it, so we can see what they are, and be able to wrap the support around those players in those moments of time. Learning live at a World Cup isn't the place to do that. So we've got lots of little learnings that we've really reflected on heavily, that we can shift in the short term, and then our long-term planning is to ensure that our depth of players is strong, that what we're doing, how we're connecting with the clubs is improving, so we can ensure that these girls are being challenged within the restrictions of our environment, and that they are actually experiencing those emotions of a World Cup without being at a World Cup, for sure.
You speak about the players there. Let's just bring them into this part of the conversation. So what sort of, take this where you want, but I'll try and keep it really broad. What sort of players are you looking for? Like what sort of players get themselves into an international, again, youth international level selection or consideration?
Yeah. I think at the moment it's a real mixed bag, because the levels of depth we have of players in New Zealand. We're working on, this is one of the projects we're working on this year within the pathway, is to really define that, what we're looking for. But I think as a generic kind of answer, before we kind of dive into too much detail, I want to bring players to the World Cup who want to be football ferns. So who have the desire, the work ethic, the coachability to progress in their football career, that see past a World Cup, that gets inspired by it, that inspires the drive to get there, whether they make it or not to that tournament, but have the kind of the willingness and desire to move, to go beyond that point, to become a football fern, to become a professional footballer, to travel through an A league, hopefully into a bigger league, and things like that. What we look like on the ground, is what we're starting to really define. And players that want to win and don't want to lose, I think, is really important. Players that can put their body on the line, that have that kind of mentality to sacrifice themselves for the team, the benefit of the team. I think are huge. And then, of course, you need technical, tactical fundamentals. You need a base level of that. And then I think what we don't do well is we don't create X factor. So we don't create individuals. We don't allow the space for individuals to be proud, confident individuals on the football field. And that was the other big thing we noticed at the World Cup last year. Every team had superstars. Every team had girls that were, give me the ball, I'll do it. I think as Kiwis, we deem it as cocky or have an attitude and things like that, where I think we need to refine, or I guess relook at the way we see that and really embrace it, because global football is beautiful, and it was beautiful to see these young girls being so expressive, and I think we need to enhance that a little bit better.
The first part of your kind of response there was around, showing that you want to be a football fern and can, live at the world stage. Now, that's really easy to put my hand up and go, yep, that sounds a bit of me. How do players, or how can players demonstrate that? What are you looking for to see that? How do you know if that is actually the reality of their makeup versus just somebody saying, yeah, I can tick that box?
Yeah, 100%. I think that we lack students of the game. I think the players that become students of the game, that are out kicking the ball on their day off against a brick wall, doing those extra little bits, the ones that have a really growth mindset, that aren't afraid to make mistakes because they understand the process. I guess deliver a product that allows them to be able to learn those things around recovery support networks, and then showing intent to implement them. It's not about getting it right at this age, but it's about showing the intent that that's what they're wanting to do.
Yeah, I think the second part around, you spoke about X factor. I think we as coaches should celebrate someone's strength and actively show, encourage that. And sometimes it is at the detriment of the team outcome. I think, as an example, I think if I'm a winger and I'm, amazing in 1v1 dribbles, but I might be in a 3v1 situation, and if I choose to still go through that, take those three players on, and maybe I lose the ball, and when maybe a simpler pass might be the best option. Well, at what level are we talking about? Are we talking about under 14s? Well, if that one player is the one player that might have a chance to play senior national football, and that's their X factor, encourage them to take that challenge on all the time, because if they can get past 3 at under 14s level, then they might have a chance of getting past 1 at international level. Or they might realize, 3 is too many. What other solution can I then add to my toolkit? But if I'm getting blamed for pass the ball, I think we miss opportunities as coaches to celebrate people's strengths as well. What about
absolutely. I think also, what just comes into play in the female game too is being realistic about your self-assessment. So dribbling against 3 players, what level are those 3 players at? And I think because the spectrum of ability in the girls' game in New Zealand is really wide, that when these girls are reaching the talent pathway and when we're assessing their games and we're working together with footage, it's like 1v1 skill against someone that wouldn't be deemed a potential talent versus someone that is, and that bravery to be able to do it against the better players is, also the struggle that we deal with within that pathway.
Yeah, great point. What about parents? How do you think they can help their children along this journey? Like, what are some things that you're actively working with parents in your current role as pathways manager, or you've done in the past, so at St Andrews with high school age kids? Provide some examples maybe of really positive interactions and things that you have actively tried to implement that parents listen and can go, I can now do a little bit more of this.
I think the parent pathway is really important. I think it's probably an uneducated area, especially in our pathway. I think my best example of a parent good parenting, or I guess parenting of an athlete would be Kate Taylor's parents. And I'm sure they won't mind me saying this, but I coached Kate Taylor for 3 or 4 years in the Pride pathway. And I think I had a conversation with them once. They just allowed her to grow, to learn how to be independent on her own. If she forgot her boots, that was on her. They definitely didn't spoon feed her. They definitely weren't helicopter parents. They were at every game. They supported her, but they let her be her, and they kind of let her choose her pathway. So she made decisions about if she was going to play school football or not, if she was going to train that day because she had a game that day. And that allowed Kate to learn and fail and I guess trust the support of her coaches that she had and the education she could get. And, that's worked out really positively for Kate. I think what we can sometimes, and we witness this at the World Cup, get wrong is view our opinions too heavily on our kids and set too high of an expectation, or our kids believe every word we say or have so much trust in us as parents. What they hear, they take on board. So if it's contradicting with the staff, or if their opinion is you should be starting and you're not starting, then it really tears the kid apart, and they're kind of sitting in between two camps, and it's really hard to deal with it as coaches, having that external kind of messaging not being on the same page. So I think front-footing parents really early in the process is really important, bringing them on the journey and explaining, a little bit more about why and how we do things and those outcomes. And also teaching them, one of my favorite things I've just listened to on a podcast lately is around our kids ask us, like Lulu does this, my 9-year-old, she'll draw a picture and she, Mum, do you like it? And it's like, we're actually asking her, do you like it? What do you like about it? What would you do different? And just educating parents around that conversation skill on the way home from the car, rather than being our opinion, I love it, I love this piece, I don't like this piece, or things like that. And it teaches them to become more resilient, to have a little bit more self-awareness and self-assessment on their own. So then as it, the situation changes and the pressure becomes higher, hopefully their resilience levels are a little bit higher.
Yeah, I love that. And as a parent yourself, right, Lulu's not quite the conversation level of parents listening to these, but, I'm not a parent, so I find it hard to provide any real context outside of personal experiences I've had with parents or players that I work with. But as a parent and as a coach working with parents, like, how has that helped shape you? Are there things that you are still trying to work better on as a coach now when you interact with parents, or are they also very different, same as players, that there's no real one kind of approach and you've got to tailor your approach to each?
Yeah, I think it's definitely helpful being a parent, because I know and I understand that, like, your kid is the greatest thing. So if you genuinely don't look outside of your child's world often, so you don't want them to be sad, you don't want them to struggle. So you kind of do things that, I guess, band-aid those feelings and emotions. But what we actually want to do is embrace those feelings and emotions, because that's being a human, that's living and that's growing. So if they're being, I guess, guided through something falsely, then it's not real. So yeah, the disappointment of not being selected should be supported, not discouraged. And the opportunity to be able to put your arm around your child and say, okay, what should we work on, rather than, I disagree with that, you should be starting. They're two different conversations and two different ways to raise your children, but are tough ones. But it takes education, right? Like, no one's born with that knowledge.
Yeah, one of the, I can't remember who said this, but a quote that has stuck in my mind is, we want our children to develop bruises, not scars. And the analogy there means, have these failures and disappointments and struggles, which as a bruise will heal and go away. But, scars are kind of permanent. So we don't want to have a long-lasting effect. I think that's great advice for coaches as well, right? We want to, I view my role as pathway manager here at Melbourne Victory is to microdose our athletes. So the time they get onto the highest end of the pathway, i.e. the A-League, they've experienced as much as they can experience. They've developed those bruises that have healed, and they're ready to kind of tackle that where it actually matters. What about, just to finish off, your current role, right? Women's talent development manager, or pathways at New Zealand Football. How are you viewing that part of your role to develop athletes and parents and coaches and the game in New Zealand? What's your sort of, where are you trying to go in the next couple of years with that?
Yeah, it's a huge role. It's cool because I think in the women's space, we have pretty much a clean sheet to kind of kick off with. FIFA have this massive project on the TDS scheme, so talent development scheme, which is really giving us a lot of support in that space. So we have Kelly Cross, our mentor, that can really guide us in terms of a lot of knowledge. I just come home from Brisbane from a knowledge exchange with 15 other MAs, which was just invaluable to understand what female youth pathways look like outside of our country, Australia included, which was really cool. So some of the projects we're kind of going to work through on our pathway is the difference between the boys and the girls in New Zealand is there's more structured competition for the boys. So clubs have a lot more higher quality contact in mixed space. So New Zealand Football's boys pathway can heavily lean on the ID process and the talent ID being in clubland. Outside of the Wellington Phoenix and the Auckland region, we really struggle for the depth in competition and quality coaching in the girls space. So we need to develop support for those coaches. So we're not talking about CB licensed coaches. We're talking, a tier under that in order how they can help their athletes that we're kind of hopefully IDing a little bit younger as this role kind of keeps going. So ID is a massive one. Club support, so bringing the clubs on the journey with us. The reality is clubs have the players 80 to 90% of the time. We take them away for a couple of weeks. And maybe hopefully every term, and that's it. So the development is done with the clubs. So we really want the clubs to feel like that they are doing a service and reward them for that as well, which can look like lots of different things. And then just having the other one is more for the players and parents. So an induction process, an understanding of what the next 5 years could look like in New Zealand football. Do I have to move? Don't I have to move? And I guess answering and calming all those or educating all of those types of questions that you get from, a 13-year-old girl that lives in Invercargill to a 18-year-old girl that lives in Auckland or is playing for the Wellington Phoenix. So there's a bit in that, but we're getting through it.
There's a lot to do, which is pretty exciting. And I similar role to myself, right? I have a pathway hat on, developing the future generations of our game, as well as a coaching hat. So you get to get on the grass and experience both. So it's pretty rewarding. So I wish you all the best. Let's finish off, Gunny, with our rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Start off with asking me a question. I also want the audience to think how they might answer this. Okay.
What is your biggest challenge being a male coaching females?
I've gone on two initial thoughts here. Firstly, my initial thought was I don't see many challenges because I view them as athletes and footballers. So I would deliver pretty similar sessions to males and females, irrespective. That's just my approach. I think some of the language and maybe more depth of questions with females more than the males might be the subtle difference. The challenge point was, and this might only be in my head, right? So I think as a male now, could be a perception that we use the women's game as a stepping stone or a chance to progress and experience things at a higher level than you could in the men's game in order to then go back to the men's game, leapfrog that. I think it is not a concern. I think it is something that happens. But for me, I've been in the women's game now for 15 or so years, so I've never viewed it as such. But I feel that the challenge would be males coming into this female space as opposed to a female coming in and getting this opportunity, is looked down upon, or could be looked down upon. But that could also just be a perception that I feel. So, but in terms of other challenges, for me, I try not to differentiate female athlete to male athlete too much. Good question though. Outline a concept or idea from your world that we can potentially test out and use in ours.
Say that one more time.
Give us a concept or an idea that you use or have used, use in our world.
Actually, that was kind of the one that I shared before around our questioning back to our children around their self-assessment rather than our opinion. To try and, I guess, aid that seeking of approval and try and enable that ability to grow resilience. Yeah. So questions like, what do you like? What do you like about it? What would you do different? Yeah.
Cool. Give us a recommendation for a podcast, movie, TV series, book that we can get amongst.
Yep. I just finished reading Surrounded by Idiots, Thomas Erickson. I actually read it kind of leading into the World Cup and then through the World Cup. So it was really cool to be able to implement the personality types to the staff. And I actually shared it with them a lot. And so without putting them in boxes of colour, it was actually really easy to kind of put them in boxes of colour. But what it did help me do is understand them better. I think coaches, to be a good coach, you need a level of psychology understanding. And so that book was really helpful.
Nice. If you had a magic wand and could change one thing, I'll leave this up to you. What would you change?
Cost. Yeah, the cost to play for kids. Yeah.
I think that would be echoed by a lot of people, especially the side of the Tasman where it blows my mind the cost to play one season of club football at under 14s. In New Zealand, when I was there, it was $115. Right here, it's upwards of $3,000. It is ridiculous. It is what it is. One piece of advice that somebody gave you that you can give us.
When I got this role, I had actually gone through a bit of a process trying to get it and didn't get it and then kind of got it. It was a bit hard. I got told to think like a man but feel like a mum, which I actually really liked because I think so often females don't think they're capable or ready we want to be overqualified for a role where, without generalizing, men don't. But then my strength is actually my soft skills, my empathetic side and stuff like that. So think like a man and feel like a mum.
Like that. That could be the next one, but provide us a quote for the week.
Fake it till you make it. It's one of my faves.
And lastly, Gunnie, what is the thing that you are striving for at the minute?
Just growth in our pathway. So we need to evolve the game. We need to shift it into a positive direction. I want to grow the female game in New Zealand in a positive manner. Yeah. Brilliant.
Hey, mate, I appreciate your time and I love these chats with guests, but to have it with a genuine mate is kind of special as well. So I've been really humbled by some of your responses and reflections back in our early days. I look back upon those really fondly, and to see the coach that you've developed into over this sort of 15-year journey is amazing. So one thing we haven't done is actually competed against each other in opposite dugouts. So I don't know when that time will come, but no doubt it's probably not too far around the corner. So I wish you well for the remainder of this year, the World Cup later in the year, and keep up all the good work.
Thanks, Gareth. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for sticking through to the end of this episode. It would mean the world to us if you could hit the like or share button so we can get these amazing insights out to other like-minded coaches, athletes, and parents. Cheers.